Hey listeners, DM Shay here. I know I can speak for both of us when I say this. Kyle and I are super thankful that you take time to listen to our podcast every time it downloads. We are super thankful for that. The reason I'm bringing this little clip to you is because when we recorded this specific episode, Kyle and I had just our email, dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com, to give us a chance to meet you, the listener, and have you give us feedback or comments or questions and things like that. But we hadn't started anything as far as social media platforms were concerned. I'm pleased to announce right now that we actually have recently launched an official Facebook page and Twitter handle. If you would like to connect with us on Facebook, you can find us on the Dungeon Master Talk podcast page. You can also find us on Twitter at DMT the podcast, as well as use the hashtag Dungeon Master Talk. As of this moment, Facebook and Twitter are the only two social media platforms that we are on, but who knows, that might change in the future. Again, thank you for joining us on Dungeon Master Talk. With that, here is our latest installment of the podcast.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Talk, the podcast specifically for Dungeon Masters by Dungeon Masters. I am your co-host, Kyle.
And I'm your co-host, Shay. Kyle, man, I'm excited to be back here once again talking about the game of Dungeons and Dragons.
Right, man? It feels like, I know for listeners, we've only had a few out now, but dude, it feels like it's been forever since we talked about Dungeons and Dragons, even though I think it's only been, 3 weeks?
Something like that. Could be long, could be shorter, could be long. Well, actually, I think we talked about it like yesterday too, so that probably doesn't help our case, but...
Well, texting doesn't count.
Oh, man, okay. But
I'm talking about like audible voices discussing Dungeons and Dragons, being Dungeon Masters.
That's fair. But hey, on that note, thank you everybody for your downloading of our episodes. We super appreciate it. We actually want to just thank you for all of that. We did not expect you guys to be downloading as fast as you did, and especially we were blown away to have some of our friends overseas downloading this podcast as well. So thank you so much for investing in your time into this podcast. We super appreciate it.
Yeah, guys, harking back to what we said in episode 0, we just like the idea that anyone would like to hear two dorks like us talking about Dungeons and Dragons and just how much we enjoy being the Dungeon Master and hopefully sharing with you guys some knowledge from our experiences. It just blows our minds. So thank you so much for your support. And also for your emails that you guys have been sending in. That means the world to us.
So Kyle, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, Shay, I got a hard one for you. World building.
Oh, gosh. Oh man, I love world building.
Yes.
I'm no good at drawing the map for it, but I love the idea of world building.
Right? And here's the trick, Shay. We got to keep this at near-ish 30 minutes because I know we could have an 8-hour talk on world building. So let's preemptively call this world building part 1 because I know we'll come back to this in the future.
Put away my PowerPoint and my overhead projectors and okay, I'll put it all away. Hold on.
I mean, you can have that stuff out for me, but I reminding you, audio podcasts.
Oh yeah, that's true, huh? Yep. So, world building from a 35,000 foot view.
Yeah, that's about the moon, right?
I would think so. So when you think of a world building in general, and I know a lot of the newer people, I would say this is probably one of the most intimidating factors of D&D for new people. With the experienced veterans, probably not as intimidating, but I would definitely say for new people especially, it's probably the most intimidating because you're like, oh my gosh, I have to figure out how to build continents. I have to figure out people's histories. Are there gods? Yep. How does magic work? So you have to figure out all of this at once and at the same time, not all at once. So Kyle, what would you say is something that's helped you, being a newer DM like myself, to kind of come up with your world building like you're doing for our game?
My biggest advice is start small. And really that feels counterintuitive. I know my initial instinct was I wanted to come in top down. I wanted to decide how many continents there were going to be. I wanted to decide my deities, and then I wanted to decide how the oceans were, and then I wanted to decide how magic was. No, start small. Start with that intro place where your characters are going to be. For me, when I was actually finally into my world, that intro spot for my characters wasn't even a full-fledged town, it was a ship. And that ship they were on, I dove in deep. And really, what that does for you is it gives you practice of creating motivations, creating backstories for your NPCs so you know how they would react to situations the player characters will put them in, and get you into that practice so that eventually that's something you can come up with on the fly. And it really, your players will make that small scope area, whether that be a ship like my intro, a starting village, maybe you do like a town and surrounding forest for your first, they'll make that feel big. And then once you get that and you're starting to make some characters, you're starting to dive into, hey, what motivates them? With that, that naturally comes into building the history for that area, which then naturally brings you into the grander scale kingdom, maybe, if that's where you're taking your campaign to, kingdom, country, realm. That all comes next, and it naturally builds off of itself one off after another. And then pretty soon you're at the point where you've built out the entire continent that they're on, and you've already thought about gods to a degree, how you're going to handle deities in your campaign, and that brings you up to the point where you're finally answering those top layer high up questions where, like I said, I wanted to start.
I would agree. It's for me, it's kind of like Grand Theft Auto in a sense. Like when you look at the map of Grand Theft Auto when you first start, you see literally about the size of your dot on the map, and that's maybe a couple of streets, and that's about it. But as you complete missions and you start driving around, like your map gets bigger, your world gets bigger, and then pretty soon by the end of the game, you've basically got the whole map that it was intended to be. And I agree, like starting small, you don't like if you don't have a starting point, you don't have a game.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like you have to start somewhere, and if you try to do everything all at once, then you're going to overwhelm yourself and probably either give up or be so stressed out that it's not going to be fun anymore. So really, to back up your point, you really want to start small because it gives you a bite size way to get started. It gives you a small enough sample size to say, okay, here's this village or town. Okay, what are some common shops that you would see in a town? Okay, you'd see a bar, a tavern. You'd see maybe you might see a blacksmith shop. You might see like a place to stable your horses. You might see, the list goes on and on and on. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna, the list goes on, and then you can kind of piece out from there. But I also think too, when it comes to actually, no, I'm gonna stop at that point.
Right. So really, guys, in previous episode, we talked about how you can start with a pre-gen and build into that. I think, honestly, what we're talking about here is thinking a little bit beyond, or maybe you want to build in more to that pre-gen. And one of the advices that I give to new DMs is don't be afraid to make magic a scarcity while you're starting out. And here's my reason for that. One, it's going to make any wizards in your party feel more special just out of the box. They're going to, low level, they're going to feel squishy. So making them feel unique is a good thing. But also, number two, it allows you to, while you're building your world, to not also be trying to learn how to manage spell slots for non-player characters and how to handle wacky magical events coming from something other than your player. Then when you want to change that, it can be as simple as traveling to another kingdom or having your playgroup do something in the campaign that releases more magic into the world. There's ways storyline to justify your introduction to more things as you learn them. And the more you work on doing that, the more natural it really feels. For me, I started off with the only people in my campaign that had magic were my wizard and my druid and my cleric in my party. And then eventually, because the pre-gen that I was working with introduced a enemy wizard, I got to learn a little bit of how to play that. And then I ramped it up a little bit. Then I introduced a good guy druid. And then I introduced the primary good guy dwarf that was a NPC was actually secretly a magic wielder himself. and then I just ramped it up a little bit naturally, so they've encountered a little bit more magic as they progress through the campaign. And that felt natural to the players, because to them it was just like, oh, as we're getting higher level, we're encountering more fun stuff. But it was also, hey, as I'm progressing as your DM and I have the world built out a little bit more, I'm having more time to learn how to do this myself as a DM, not as a player. And tracking all this stuff, I'm getting better at it, so I'm opening up the playbook a bit more, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, kind of swooping down into more of like a 25,000 foot view of like getting started. So, like, kind of going back to our original premise of like starting small, right? Starting with a small village. How much work do you usually put into your NPCs for the village?
All right, so I'm going to give you the two answers. I'm going to give you what I used to do and what I do now. I used to spend way too
I
much
like that.
time. I used to go in and every NPC had at least 3 paragraphs, and I'm talking probably 3 pages total, because you've seen how I write paragraphs, Shay. They're huge. I'm not a
It's
great
true.
writer.
I have seen it. Yes.
And so I wrote way too much. Now I really break it down into primary motivations, back a little bit of a backstory, and then I try to describe a little bit of what I think their voice will be pre going into it. It gives me a little bit of freedom in the moment to kind of judge how I'm feeling about doing voices. If my throat's hurting from a previous voice, maybe they'll sound more like me. If I'm really feeling the role play with the party, maybe I'll go more into it. But really, I found having that primary motivation allows me to build out that character and make them feel unique, but without spending so much time on a character that my party may not even have a conversation with, or may only have one conversation with.
Yeah, that's fair. I think for me, when I've done that is I will kind of randomly make up an idea for somebody I want to have running this particular shop. And sometimes I like to throw a wrench in everybody's plans. And like there have been times where I've had a gnome blacksmith
Yep.
and I had a half orc bartender. And, I've had like just random off the wall type characters that you wouldn't normally see sometimes. And I think that kind of throws a wrench in it. But too, and to your point, I think it's good to have like a general idea of like who they are, because who knows, your PCs may or may not even talk to them. And if they do, it might be 2 sentences, or if it ends up being something huge, then if they start showing interest in that one particular NPC or non-player character, then that would be sometime something that you can start writing in a backstory of,
Yep.
oh, my kids live here, I grew up here, blah blah, and some of that you do have to think on the fly depending on how quickly they get invested in these specific NPCs that you create. But also depending on, like you said, with the story plot, if they're secretly part of the problem or if they're not part of the problem, and then you have to really play it carefully to not tip your hand necessarily to, oh, I'm actually a bad guy but I can't tell you that right now,
Yep.
kind of thing.
So I definitely have my different scales of NPCs. And to kind of show how into this I am outside of this session, I can't take full credit of this. So I had a friend at my workplace who gave me this idea. I have a Trello board for my important NPCs and my major plot points in the story. And that's how I'm tracking things now. I did not start with that. My world was not big enough to start with that initially. Now I have multiple parties interacting with the story. It's gotten more complex. And most of that stuff's been kicked off by my players, and I'm having things happen in the world as they're progressing through. So they have their little tunnel vision of the world, but the world's progressing naturally without them as well. So I do that to try to make the world feel more organic to me. Otherwise, everything's static plates, and then my players come back to it and it hasn't changed at all since they left. That doesn't feel realistic to them. That's jarring to that suspension of belief. So I track it that way. But I have two different tiers of NPCs. I have the NPCs that I'm going to track their names, primary motivations, and try to keep a note on what the voice sounded like, so when they re-encounter them, they'll feel the way they did before. But then I have my NPCs that I want to stand out or to matter, and they may or may not be the villains. Those are the ones that still get more written out for them. But some of my NPCs that have really stuck around and stayed for the party, I wrote very little for them because it was a very basic premise that I could just wield throughout the the play session. And so that sometimes works better for me as well, as to just have like, this is the main thing about this character. Whenever they encounter him, they're gonna be doing this, regardless of what the party's done. They're still doing this, and that's just who they are, and that makes them really easy to pick up and place into a moment as well.
So going back on that, so how do you differentiate the? So you said 2 tiers. Are either one of those more story driven than the other?
Yeah,
Because it sounds like both are kind of fairly story driven, if I'm understanding you right.
so that's a hard one to answer, but yes, the one that I write more for, those are my story-driven NPCs. So those are going to be the ones that matter. Like if I have a captain of the guard that they're going to interact with, or a king or queen of a country or kingdom, or if I have senators for a parliament, they're going to get more, because ideally they're going to matter more in the story. Unless I'm just going to have them as a figurehead and the party's going to hear about them only. If it's just a shop hand that I really don't plan on the party interacting with. Now, they've caught me on this a few times, so that's why it's important to always have your motivations figured out, so that way you can determine
Yep.
how that character would react. I'm not going to write as much of them because I don't plan on them being important for the story. And I emphasize plan there because sometimes my players have different plans, or sometimes you have to be really careful. You'll describe something small, and to you it's small, like you mentioned it and you moved on, but your party will zero in, and it can be like you mentioned there's a cow in this barnyard, and now your rogue is obsessed with this cow, and then when you go to voice its moo, and you said it was a calf, not a cow, sorry, I said it was a calf. I want you to describe my moo as too adult of a moo, so then I had to do a more calf sounding moo, and then my rogue was like, no, you mooed twice.
and then we proceeded to try and convince the rogue that no, that was not actually a cow, that was a human, or was it the other way? I can't remember. One side decided it was a human, the other decided it was a cow, and based
Yeah.
on cow's interpretation of farm animals, it could be one or the other.
So that really stemmed out of the dice betraying me. So I asked them to
That's
roll a
also true.
perception, just to be like, okay, you guys are gonna get any decent perception. I'd be like, yes, you know for sure it's a cow, and of course they crit fail. Of course that happens. So now
Of
I have
course.
to be a good DM and honor the crit fail.
Yep.
But then even later when I'm like, okay, guys, we've had enough fun with this cow. It was just a cow. They're like, no, we don't believe you. Yeah, sometimes your party will derail and make something little that you don't plan on mattering at all really matter to the plot.
Yeah,
But
we tried to go cow tipping. It didn't pan out quite well.
no. And so coming back, reining this in a little bit, really the key thing for a player character to make them feel real is, one, be confident in your presentation of this non-player character. Even if you are going by the seat of your pants, which I do way more often than I care to admit, because they'll ask me for a player, like an area, or we'll progress a little bit further than I thought they would. So now we're in a part of the town that I wasn't ready for us to get to, but we're nowhere near the time where it'd be good to stop. Like it would have been an incredibly short session because maybe they skipped over 2 battles I'd planned, or didn't talk to somebody. Now we're over here. I wasn't ready. Now I am improving this character. The thing to make it feel like your players are going to invest in it is just be confident how you're portraying them. Take some notes as you go so that you can remember that character. Because I do have a wizard in my group that I think he's caught on to when I make up names on the spot, and so then he'll specifically ask for that character again. Like we'll re-enter town, and he'll be like, "I want to find this person." And so now I'm flipping through pages of my
he's done
notes.
that.
Yep. So now I'm doing a much better job, I hope, of tracking the names I say so that I'm ready next time.
One of the things that I've used in the past is I have a massive Google Doc sheet, and I have it broken into tabs of NPC names, store names, jail names, tavern name, whatever. It's literally the whole reason that this Google Doc sheet or Google Excel sheet exists is because I need a name and I need it quick. But right next to it, I have a little like column that says where did I use this, and so then I'll say, okay, it was in this town for this game, at this time. So that kind of helps me kind of keep track of my people a little bit. At least that keeps me, if nothing else, from double using the same name twice.
Yep.
So there's that. But kind of shifting away from the people part of it to more of a map thing. As we've talked about in previous sessions, maps can be a very good tool. They don't necessarily have to be like Mozart or Picasso type. When I say Mozart, that's music. Never mind.
I had no idea. Do you not have Mozart?
Wow.
If you can figure out how to make a map out of song.
I was going for Michelangelo, and Mozart came out, so there's that. But now that I've made a complete idiot of myself, it doesn't have to be that level of like artistry. I mean, just a crude visualization is good. One of the things that I know I struggled with was like, okay, what's the terrain like? Like that was a big thing for me, is like figuring out the layout of the land and stuff. And if nothing else, you can start a campaign with the terrain that's around you.
Yep.
Like you don't have to think about something that's completely on the other side of the planet or whatever. Just use your area. Like I'm from the I've lived in the Midwest my whole life, so I understand farming. I understand these little hills we call them hills, and then you look at like the Rockies and the Appalachians, you're like, no, not even close.
Yeah, we have bumps.
But yeah, we have little bumps. But like use the terrain around you if that's a struggle for you, just to kind of help get yourself off the ground, and then you can go into, well, as you travel north, it gets a little bit colder, or if you travel south, it gets colder because your world is different like that. Whatever you end up doing, if you get stuck in that map part of it, just use what's around you, and then expand from that.
Yep. And really, when you're wanting to introduce something different, just one thing that I remember all the time is that terrain very rarely like abruptly changes. So if
that's also true.
Are traveling from the plains to mountainous, you're going to have an elevation change. So you're going to have a temperature drop before you see or you might see the mountains forever in the distance. Like if you're going from Wyoming to Denver, Colorado, you can see those Rocky Mountains forever before you're there. I just remember that as a child trying to go to Denver to watch the Rockies play baseball, and like, oh, Dad, we're getting close. Oh, not even close, son. We're still hours away.
Yeah, I remember we would go across the Midwest and we'd be like, okay, as soon as we start seeing mountains, we can start getting excited. And the problem is you can see them off in the distance, but if anybody's seen like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, like that one where Sir Guy had like running across the field, and it takes him like 12 scenes just to get across the field before he starts doing whatever he's doing. And that's basically going across the Midwest, man. It's like it takes you forever to get there.
Yep. And so,
but anyway, I digress. But to your point, like it's one of those things where like it doesn't just abruptly change. Like you don't have a sign like in cartoons where it's like, okay, this stops and it's like obviously it's like sand and then it's snow. Like there's no way that's going to happen just because of how climates work, right?
Yep.
So you kind of keep that idea in mind of, okay, it's going to be a gradual transition, like you were talking about. It will gradually get colder. The air will get thinner as you go up, obviously, as we know. So that will be something that maybe your heavy hitter who's carrying a bunch of stuff for you starts feeling sooner. Yep. That could be something that could affect somebody else if you're whatever. So,
and really, if you also remember in D&D, you can do things like fast travel. So you can avoid the feel of role-playing a walking simulator or role-playing the Oregon Trail if you want. Now, really with that topographical stuff, one piece of advice I have, look at real-life continents. We have 7 of them here on our planet. So what I did for mine is I kind of looked at North America, where I'm from, and then also looked at Australia because it's always been interesting to me. I just find it really cool that there's this place that if I go there, I'm most likely going to die because I'll be allergic to everything, and everything that grows there is going to try to kill me. And then
I do want to go visit though at some point. That would be awesome.
More power to you. I would love to go there ideally, like in my head, but I'm scared of me physically being there.
Sign me up. I'll go.
And then I also thought about like Ireland, and just because I'm a redhead. I know none of you guys can see me. I'm a redhead, so I get compared to, even though I'm not, but get compared to that a lot. And so I thought of those areas. So I looked them up, and then I kind of tried to make the area of my campaign where it is now have just a little bit of like highlights I got from Google Maps, the topographical ones in different regions. And then I didn't get too fancy. My continent that we're on right now, it's kind of like an oblong square, if that makes sense at all. Like a rounded rectangle that's not quite a cylinder.
I mean, it's almost trapezoidal, but not quite. It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of wonky stretched.
Yeah,
But
I was trying to make a little, after a little bit when I realized I was like, oh, this is getting sharp corners. I was like, make it a block. And so, but your
I
player characters will appreciate the effort, and that's something I've
yeah,
noticed a lot is when you put in effort, they appreciate that and they embrace it. And
yeah.
and really that little things like that, like weird shape stuff, that's going to get pointed out more when you're new to D&D than once you're experienced at it, because your group, as you get going, you'll find what matters to your group. And
Mhm.
to my group, I know that it's okay to go a session without combat, but it's not
Mhm.
really okay to go 3 sessions without combat. Then they start to be like, hey, what are we doing again? And so
Yeah.
I know that I can spend a little bit of time on NPC interaction, have some fun pop culture references to stuff, as long as it doesn't become centered around that, and then get us into some fun combat, throw in some weird situations with dice. I also allow my players to roll against each other to a degree if it's like trying to call somebody on a bluff check, because we're getting some interesting dynamics built out. But I didn't do that
Mhm.
at first. Probably, oh, I don't know, like the first 6 months, I didn't allow for that at all, because as a DM, I was like, I don't want to watch that. But
I don't want to have to deal with it. Yeah.
yep, and so you'll find as you're building your world and as your players are interacting with it, what kind of matters for them, and you'll start spending more attention on that. But my recommendation is don't let your team get too tunnel visioned on some aspects of D&D. Go ahead and flesh out in your spare time as a DM those other areas and introduce it more to make your group more well-rounded. It'll really help make the sessions feel fresh over time, and you'll find that some players that maybe they've been taking kind of a backseat, you introduce another aspect of the world, like introducing more magic. That might get your magic centric players more involved in the role play. Or introducing deities. Now that's just going to get, hey, players that checked, hey, what deity am I to on my character
Yep.
sheet? Or maybe they didn't believe in the deities at all. Now they're more active, more involved, and they're role playing out that character in that regard. And it makes your out of combat time feel more meaningful and more fleshed
Yep.
out.
Or like, and really, you have to gauge the players in your group. Like, you were saying, okay, what deities matter? Okay, so that's going to matter to your clerics, your paladins, and probably a druid,
Yep.
more than likely. I mean, more than likely, the druid's the only one. The druid and maybe the ranger are the only two people that are going to really ask you about the nature side of things. Other than that, it may not be a big deal to your group. Um, one thing, kind of going back to the map concept, I saw somebody do this, and I think it was on YouTube, and I don't remember where it was, so I apologize for not having my ducks in a row on that. But basically, the guy had a bunch of different dice, and in his brain, he had color coded. Okay, if it's blue, it's water. If it's green, it's whatever. And he basically took it in a big old bag and he dumped it out onto this table, and he started tracing around everything. So
Oh,
that's how he
nice.
drew it. Now, he was doing more of a big picture looking in, so kind of opposite of what we were talking about. But his idea was like, this is the most random way that I can build a new world for my players.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. Now, granted, that would require a lot of dice, which is fine. If you have a lot of dice, or if your group wants to come together and make one big map together, sweet, that's pretty cool. But I just thought that was an idea that was worth mentioning, if that's something that because some people like to think big picture and then work their way in. Some people, like myself and we've talked about kind of working our way from the inside out.
Yep.
So if you want to go big picture to a smaller degree, that's fine. That would be a way of doing it. If you need some help like drawing, if you're just one of those people that can just whip a map out of their head and just put it on paper, then all the power to you.
I want to
And
teach you.
I
I
I
not
hope
teach you. I want to meet
I
you.
hope that
Sorry.
you publish that so that people can buy it from you and you make a bunch of money. But you know, it's just a different way to do that
Yep.
as well.
And also, don't don't think that just because you declare something one way with your players that can't ever be changed. So you can start with what your players know and then have reality in the world be different and introduce that change over time, and it's your players uncovering the difference. So if you start out with saying like, hey, there is one deity in my world and that everybody
There can
recognizes
only
this
be
one
one.
deity, you can later introduce that maybe there's actually a pantheon, or maybe the world believes in pantheon but it was all a myth. Like that can be fun, interesting story points on your that you uncover for your players. So like if you're building it one way and you're going for a while and you go, you know what, this isn't really working, you can switch it up within the same campaign. Just think of it from a story standpoint. Don't jar your characters with it. Introduce it with a story. It can become a fun plot point. I did this to a small degree, very small degree in my world, with introducing like champions of the gods. So I always had the gods introduce my players and I've been playing them very true for my players. So there's even been some interaction with some deities. But then now I'm introducing some champions and they've encountered two, and those have been like jarring interactions because my players have been feeling like they were the chosen ones, but then here's some other chosen. And so those are just ways that you can introduce expanding understanding of stuff that you've already built out before, or even to a degree changing understanding. And then I always say whenever you're doing anything like that, once you've built your world, to check in with your players afterwards, see how like stuff went, kind of get a pulse. You don't have to ask for like a full review back. That's too formal. But just like ask what they thought about stuff. But coming back into that world building, I kind of like to follow a little bit of a checklist. So I like to get my players starting small, but then that's going to be their first interaction. Before we play that session one, I want to be thinking out to what's going to be available next. So within that small village that we started in, or town or boat, I want to, if we're in a ship, where are they going? If we're in a town, right, is that town part of a larger kingdom? Is it part of a democratic country? Is it part of a anarchy land? Like what's next there? So what's that next layer above that in that world? And then start thinking, all right, this is the land, this is who's in charge of it. Are there lords? Are there like that serve under like to keep a region in charge? If so, who are they? Flesh out a little bit. And if they're not going to interact for a little bit, they're just going to hear the name. I define the name, some key traits, and then I leave a note for myself to come flesh that out further. And then just keep like fleshing out next step. And then also, if you're doing this pre your first session, as your players are asking stuff for their backstories, we talked about this to a degree. I didn't really plan out how I was going to do druids too much. I had an idea. I was going to kind of have them be, for my Marvel fans out there, I was going to kind of have them be like the Green Lanterns for space, but for nature. They were going to like be policing stuff.
Is it Green Lantern DC?
Yeah, sorry. Green Lantern. So I meant to say Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel, but DC Green Lantern.
There you go.
Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel, where they kind of travel around and like they have their laws or their morals that they're going to hold things to, and then interact and save stuff. But then Shay gave me his backstory for his druid, and I was like, yeah, you're right, this is better. And so Control A and then backspace, delete that whole
and insert this.
Yep, and that really worked because I hadn't shared with anybody what I was doing for druids. And so take in your players' backstories, let that shape your world, let that have a little bit of impact. It's getting their voice into it before they even realize that they're supplying their voice. And then it's going to feel even more like a world built for them to play and thrive in.
You actually started going on this topic and I was getting ready to jump on. So thank you for reading my brain and going with it. I think it's also kind of cool too, because like when you bring in the player's backstory, like you're giving them that niche, like we've talked about in previous episodes, right? Yep. Like we have in our group, we have a fighter barbarian mix that he came from this specific island. Well, at least in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of like a 300 type land where it's kind of like Sparta.
Yeah,
where
it's a warrior
very
land.
like very warrior guild-ish and stuff like that. But I remember we were doing one play session and he was going through all these different ranks, and it's like, oh my gosh, like he went through and he said, okay, like this means basically sergeant, this basically means lieutenant. Like there's this whole like hierarchy of different
The
names and
unnamed, the
titles.
defiled.
And yeah, it was so like it was so I was like, that is impressive. And so like when Kyle was able to bring that in, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to go visit that island now too. So like now that we've got the stuff that we're doing, I'm like, I really like. Now granted, my druid is a little bit on the feisty side, so if he's provoked, he's gonna bow up. He won't back down from any fight. So going to this island would be fun for him, I think, because like that's just kind of the mentality. But he is bound by the law of nature to uphold that, so he's kind of in the middle of other things right now. But yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize what you were saying, like when you bring those backstories, and if your players are the type of players that like to do story type backstories, not just a hey, I came from here, like the paragraph, but like if they give you like a page or two or 8
8.5,
like something like that, like if they give you like a full story, like use the terrain that they outline in that story, and like that could be like the northeast quadrant of your map, that could be like the southeast, whatever that ends up implying, so that way you can kind of let them help you bring the map together. Even though it is your story and it is your world, they have no idea where their world meets yours.
Yep.
It's almost like you have, it's like in Paint where you have like the base, or maybe Photoshop where you've got like the base layer and then you just keep adding layer and layer and layer and layer and layer, and finally it's like boom, here is an awesome map that they didn't know they helped me build, but here we built it.
Yep. And that's really the magic of Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, any of this style tabletop RPG where you're doing shared storytelling and role play, is really the story of the whole world. It's going to evolve from play session to play session to play session, the more your players in it, because I guarantee you, once you DM a couple sessions in your world, your mind's going to be going with ideas. Players are going to say something that's going to trigger to you. They're going to say something as a joke, like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if? And then now you're going to be like, oh, that's going to happen. I just got to figure out how to make it happen organically. Or
Let
you're
me
going to be
pull
like,
up my
oh,
handy dandy notebook and here we go.
Oh, I wish I would have done a better job of tracking what is in my notebook that's a direct result out of something in a play session, because then I could point it out here. But I know it's a lot, because the next 2 days after my group plays, I am a writing fool for D&D. And then I take a break and I have to come back and decide what of it was good. And whittle it down, because so that's one thing though that I've yet to figure out. My turnaround time on play sessions, I like to have a little bit of breathing time. It's not that I don't want to play more. I would love it if my life would allow for weekly playtime. But for me, that cadence is once a month, and that gives me enough time to write like crazy after that session, digest what I wrote, digest what went on in that session, refine what I wrote, toss some stuff out every time, and then prepare for the next session. And most of the time I toss that out midway through the session because my play group derailed me. But that's just the joys of DMing.
I think for me, like kind of going on that rabbit trail, like after a play session for me, I probably give it at least 2 or 3 days before I do anything with it. Like I will, like, because we record our sessions, so and I know Kyle does too. So I will record it, I will upload it so that my team can listen to it if they want to. But after that, I try not to listen to it for like 3 days. And the reason I do that is because I want like my brain to process everything that I remember happening. Yep. And then after that, then I can go back and dissect, okay, I remember that, my rogue said this, or my cleric said that, or my sorcerer did whatever. And so then I will go back and start getting in that writer's mindset again to get ready for the next session, or, see how I can incorporate that going forward in the story that we're in.
I normally listen to it the next day, and then I won't listen to it again until probably a week or two before the next play session. And the reason I do it that way is normally I'm amped up after it, so that's why I have to listen to it once so soon.
Yeah.
but then I have to give myself that time to process it, think about it. But then I want to listen to it again because I've noticed a lot from me personally that there'll be standout moments from when we're in it. And then there's always that something that when I listen to it again, oh, I forgot X, or oh, that's not in my notes. And it's something that I'm really, and I'm going to add this caveat. I'll probably never share these recordings of my sessions just because they weren't recorded with that in mind, because so the audio quality on them is terrible, but also because they're purely for note-taking purposes for me, so I have done no effort to edit them. My group, when they listen to them, it's raw, so they're hearing every breathing, every cough, every wrestle, and there's pop moments on the mic, and I don't care. I do recommend this, even if you're like me and you never want to share that. Recording your sessions is hugely beneficial for note taking and also hearing yourself so you can get better at describing situations. I think that's helped me describe scenarios, describe landscapes, describe motives naturally without saying this person wants to do X. Because I've heard it back and I've thought about, ooh, that I've really made it sound like this and I was aiming for that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, guys, we are blown away by the support. And so just thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and listening to us, whether it be, on your drive to work, from work, in the pickup line, at home while you're making dinner, or laying in bed before you're trying to go to sleep. Just thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy day to listen to two guys just be passionate about Dungeons and Dragons. If you have a counterpoint to anything we talked about today, want to know more, have an idea for a topic that we could cover, or just want to reach out in general, you can do so at dungeonmastertalk@gmail.com, and we really look forward to reading those, and we are going to start shout outs here soon. Again, we record these ahead of time. But thank you guys so much again for listening. I am Kyle.
And I am Shay.
And we'll see you guys next time.